Welcome back to Vancouver Garage, the drywalleriest garage on the internet. Okay, you guys, mud set beads. I think these are TrimTex mud set beads. It's vinyl, right? You may have thought I said the final on vinyl, but no, we weren't done. There's a good vinyl product in my opinion, and that is the TrimTex mud set bead. So I first heard about these about 10 years ago, back when I was on Drywall Talk all the time, and they actually sent me out a box of them. So I got to be one of the first guys to start testing these out in the wild. You know, there's a handful of us on there that got sent a box. It was pretty cool. But this is the slim profile that they came out with after. The old one was called like the TrimTex rigid mud set bead. And the difference between this one and the old one is this centerpiece used to be kind of like an I-beam. So you can see how it comes out at the top. Well, it used to stick out inside here. At the very bottom, it would stick out about the same amount, you know, a few mils. And so what that meant was that you actually had to have your drywall cut back. So if you look at this drywall right here, you can see that it's cut back from the other surface a bit. So that little I-beam that was in there would have somewhere to go. But if it happened to be almost flush, like right here, the bead would sit askew like that. So the hangers had to hang the board properly or these beads didn't work. But this new, they're probably not new. I'm just out of touch and haven't used a vinyl mud set bead in ages. But okay, what makes this different than your regular vinyl bead? Well, the regular vinyl bead just has a flat, smooth surface. In fact, let's get it, I'll compare. Okay, your regular vinyl bead just has a flat, smooth surface in there, whereas this other one has what's called mud legs. You can see those little things right there. So they're a little about 1/2 millimeter little grooves, legs in there that the mud can actually grab and bind into. And I've actually been looking really close, and all the little legs actually even all go this way a tiny bit. So between them all going this way a little bit, and on this one they're sloped in this way instead of just being totally perpendicular, that's gonna really help it grab. So when those legs grab into the mud, it's gonna be even more resistant to pulling off. It's literally gonna be mechanically bonded. So in my opinion, this is actually going to have an even better bond than paper because it literally has something grabbing into it as opposed to it just being like, you know, paper on paper with glue, which is actually pretty good, but I do think that this is gonna be even better. So in terms of installing these, it's pretty simple. It's just a mud set bead. So it's the exact same as you would install a paper-faced bead. So let's get started there. Now I think one of the differences between these and your paper-faced bead is I don't think you're gonna be able to manipulate these beads as easily. I'm sure if you used Quickset and really loaded it up behind there, you probably still could, but I think there's going to be slightly less room for adjustment in the placement of these beads. But that being said, and I've never tested it myself, but there's been a lot of tests. Apparently these are one of the strongest beads on the market in terms of impact. So I am gonna do a test. We got a whole bunch of beads going on this wall. I will rig something up in some way that we can try to equally test the strength of each one of these beads so that I can have my own proof instead of just something that either TrimTex or somebody else made. But I would love to know if these are actually worth it, because if they're stronger, then I'm gonna start using these on all my jobs. And I may be late to the party. You know, it's 2022, like they started making these 10 years ago, but they weren't easy to find. You know, I mean, I got mine in a box from TrimTex, right? Like, and I'm not the kind of guy that's gonna go, oh, check that out. Look at the way the mud just kind of squeezes through here. I love that. Squish. Squish. I love that. Okay, I think we almost have it set. So it seems to go on fairly straight. I'm gonna start wiping this out. I definitely think it would be advisable to throw another coat on right away to really fill those holes up and all the voids behind it. But yeah, let's just get it like properly wiped out. The other thing about coating a bead right away is you get to see if it's on square before the mud actually dries up on you. So that's one of the other benefits to being able to coat something right away. So this side shouldn't be a problem. And it'll be interesting to see how many coats it takes. I suspect that I'm gonna have to do a third coat on here because I'm using pretty thin taping mud. So it's gonna shrink a fair bit, but it's not like it's taking me all that long to do it, and adding all that taping mud in here is really helping fill up the voids behind the bead. This bead's not on square. That's okay. Garage wall. We can get away with everything because this is a garage wall. So one thing I've just noticed is, like a steel bead, the nosing cleans off really nicely. So as we can see, you know, where the board was cut back a bit, there's quite the gap to fill back there. So in my opinion, in order to make sure that this is actually really strong, we really need to work on getting the mud in there. So going like this will do it to some degree, but I do think it actually needs a little bit of force that way to really push the mud in. I don't think most people would actually go to those lengths and do that on like a big drywall job when they're installing. But if it's your own house, I recommend that you take a little time to look like an amateur hack and slap the mud in that way. It just looks amateur because, you know, like you'd never see a pro drywaller smearing their mud all like that. They're gonna do mostly smooth motions and go for efficiency. Okay, that is having a bit of trouble burying. Yeah, I wouldn't say this is necessarily faster than paper, because this mud keeps like, it keeps eating the mud. I'm not sure where it's all going. Must be that void behind the bead. At some point, I'm just gonna have to try and forget about it. Okay, so even though this is low profile, you can really still see that flange, you know, the outer, like that line down the whole thing. So it'll be interesting to see how many coats it takes to make that disappear and how much it actually has to disappear before paint. Okay, so that mud really shrunk back, and I figured out why this flange is showing so much. So as we can see, we're still gonna see those holes again quite a lot after my next coat, once it all shrinks. Now the reason that this is showing so bad is because I put it on the bevel, right? And I think the nosing on this bead is quite low profile. As it says, it's a low profile bead, but because this is plastic, it's not as thin as something like a paper or steel bead. So as soon as you put this bead on something that's sloped this way, now this nosing doesn't stick out enough to bury the backside of this flange. So that's something to consider. If you're using mud set bead, don't use it on the bevel of a board. Normal steel bead and normal paper bead will cover there, but this one looks like even after 3 coats, it might be a little sus. Okay. Decided to break the trowel out for this one instead. I keep doing it with a knife, and as many of you know, I'm definitely slower with a knife. So that's actually covering slightly better than I expected. It's definitely still there. You wouldn't want to over sand it. And I think because of those holes, again, that's going to need one more coat, which would actually be 2 coats after install, because the first one was, you know, with taping mud, which shrinks a lot. Yeah, it's not too bad. And the other side is almost acceptable, but I still think I'm going to get a bit too much shrinkage and have to do another fill just to get rid of some of those imperfections. But yes, it does look like it's going to be salvageable, so it looks like you probably can install these on a bevel. It's risky, I would avoid it, but I think with one more coat that will be buried. And hopefully, like normally with something like steel bead, you want that flange really buried so that it's harder for it to crack and give you that, you know, 1.25 inches away from the edge hairline down the wall. But I do think that this vinyl bead is actually probably way better, like way more stuck to the wall than a steel bead, because a steel bead's not stuck to the wall, which is why it inherently cracks. Okay, this has had a few days to dry and shrink, if you can't tell by the facial hair. I love that it's different in every scene of these videos. Let's take a look at this. So I'm no longer worried about the flange at all, especially with one more coat. It's definitely buried enough. As we could see, we could totally see the perforations, and it gets worse as we go down. You know, the more of a void you have in the back there, and that wasn't hard to do. It wasn't like we had a massive gap. It was just about 1/4 inch, which is very typical. It's not even considered a gap. That's just how boarding works out sometimes. But the line from that flange is actually not as bad as it looks. It'll sand out in one coat. So the flange is not the problem here. The shrinkage in the perforations is the problem here. So I think it's pretty safe to say at this point that this bead, again, even though it's the low profile, is still gonna take 3 coats to actually cover. So I will admit that when you coat it with your first coat of taping mud, if you have it really thin, it's going to shrink back more. But let's say that I just taped it in and didn't worry about there being mud in behind there, the same way I would just tape a regular paper-faced bead. Well, I would say it would for sure take 3 coats after that to cover all these little perforations, whereas a regular steel bead or a regular paper bead, again, is only going to be 2 coats after install. So what I would say is when installing a TrimTex mud set bead, make sure that you give it a first coat while you're installing it, because it's going to take 2 more to come out perfect. Anyways, I'm going to sand this, coat it, and we'll show you what it looks like after the 3rd coat. I'll just get the Tradesman Special mask on here. Okay, as we can see, 3rd coat is definitely looking good. All those little holes are filled in, and I know they're not going to shrink back this time. So while you can really see that bead shadowing through, it's actually not as bad as it looks on camera. It's more typical that you actually can't pick up things on camera, but in this case, it's shadowing through a little worse than it looks in real life. Also, as it dries, the mud will become less transparent and more opaque, and you won't see it. But none of it's going to show through a coat of paint. Okay, so what's the final on vinyl this time? All right, my final thoughts on the TrimTex mud set vinyl beads are that they are actually a really good product. So unlike what I said where I thought you couldn't use it on the bevel, turns out you can. It did make it a little harder, so try to avoid using it on the bevel. But here are the strong points of this bead. For one, I've been informed that it's actually really strong. I'm looking forward to actually testing these out, but we're not there yet. So let's just assume that the things that we've seen on the internet are, in this case, true, and that this bead is very strong. There's the first plus. If I was doing my own house, if these hold up to the reported claims of strength, I would actually use these on my own house. The second is the nosing of the bead is actually pretty trim, so it's not that super round one that the regular TrimTex vinyl is. It's more comparable to a regular steel or paper-faced bead, so it's a nice compact nosing. The second thing is that nosing is going to be less susceptible to damage to a newbie. So something I never mention, But if you're new to drywall and you're installing paper-faced beads and you're going over them and over them, maybe you're sanding too much, maybe the paper on the nosing is getting too wet, it's really common to tear that. And you're not gonna have that problem with this. So the other thing is that because you can see where there's mud and where there isn't, and it has perforations, I think these are gonna be way easier for a beginner to install because you will see if there's mud underneath or not. Unlike a paper bead, where you only find out after you put the next coat on and you see that blister shining through. I also don't think that you're gonna have the cracking issues that a regular steel bead has at the flange. The typical crack that you see 1.25 inches away from the edge of the wall down the whole thing. I don't think you're gonna get that with these. So from a homeowner's or a builder's perspective, I think these are a really good bead to install and recommend. Okay, now let's get to the point of view of the production taper. The install of these is gonna be pretty fast because you can install them the same way as you can a regular paper-faced bead, whether that be through a hopper or a corner applicator tool or just by hand. They're a quick and easy install. But you are going to have to charge extra for these because they require that third coat. So personally, if I was like a piecework taper and somebody wanted me to install these, I would absolutely let them know that it's going to cost a little extra because they take a third coat to fill in all those perforations and make sure the flange isn't showing. So that's what you need to know. And that is my final on vinyl, unless there's something else that I actually forgot. Anyways, you guys, hopefully this clarifies some of the questions that you may have had about mud set vinyl bead. And I think it's also good that we just finally showed the other vinyl options instead of the one that I don't prefer. But after reading the comments, it does seem that the original glue-on 90-degree TrimTex vinyl bead is actually a solid product that a lot of people really like using and have great results from using. And no, TrimTex didn't make me say that. I just read enough of your comments and how many of you guys actually support those beads to realize that just because I don't like them doesn't mean they're not a good product. Anyways, thanks for watching, you guys. I hope you got something out of this. And as always, I hope your projects are going well, but I hope you are doing even better. Till the next one.